Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma. I'm Kisma, and I'm so excited for the episode today because we have a very special guest, the fabulous Cathy Heller, who is host of the podcast Don't Keep Your Day Job, as well as author of the newly released book, Don't Keep Your Day Job. Her podcast has over 9 million downloads, and she speaks directly to the talent and the joy and the possibility of what you might be able to do in your life if you're just ready to leave that job of yours or add something special. So if that sounds like it resonates with you, stay tuned and we'll be right back. Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can have the mindset to get your life and business set.
As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new to the podcast, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button in iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. If you want to get the inside info for this and every episode, as well as some free gifts, go to illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. And now let's dive in to get your mindset for your life and business set.
Hello, Cathy, and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma.
Hi. Thank you for all of those beautiful words. That was so sweet.
You are so welcome. How's your day going?
It's good. It's really good. I was just sitting in like a puddle of tears a minute ago in a good way.
In a good way?
It's funny because 10 minutes before that, I felt like crying for other reasons. But no, I was just feeling so overwhelmed because a couple people in my life were just reaching out with such kind words of support. And I just felt like once in a while, we realize how much we do need each other. Mm-hmm. And I just let that in. So you said, how are you? I'm coming off of just feeling like, wow, how beautiful to be in this world, shoulder to shoulder with a few people who really see you. And I just was taking that in for a minute. So
I love that. That really speaks to your soul and and your essence. I love it. You're a very real person. You know, we've connected a bit through a separate group.
Yeah, not enough.
Not enough. But what I do get from you, and you're up in LA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're very real. You're incredibly authentic, and there's a rawness about you that, I'm just going to start this question up. I feel like that comes from your background as a musician. And Nick and I both have backgrounds as musicians. So I love to kick off this podcast with a little bit about that. And then, of course, we've got a book to talk about and other things, your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But would you share the story behind your being a musician and what it means to your life right now?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and when you said being raw and just, maybe that connects to being an artist, mm-hmm. I think so. I think that at the end of the day, most likely if somebody is making art, whether they're writing songs or a visual painter, there's probably some pain or something really deeply that they want so much for other people to hear. And sometimes that's having gone through their own pain, or maybe it's having compassion for someone else's, but really wanting to take it away.
Yeah.
And so I do think that is probably very much connected. And I came out to LA to get a record deal. That was definitely my intention 16 years ago. I can't believe how quickly it goes. My parents had a pretty awful marriage and eventually got divorced. And then it got even worse in a way. My mom was really suicidal for a while and my dad was not really in the picture. So it was a really rough, unpleasant time. And the one thing that was always my escape was music, and it would let me feel things and it would let me hope for somewhere else that would be very far away where I would get heard. And one day maybe I would sing and write my own songs. And so I barely graduated from high school, literally my teacher lied and said that I got a grade that I didn't so that I could leave school and graduate with my class. And that was really kind of him. And I wound up going to college, and then I came out to LA with this, I have to do something that makes
Where did you grow up? What part of the country?
I grew up in South Florida, just 30 minutes north of Miami. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough place too, in the sense that there's no real culture really. It's more a place where people go to just relax and retire. And I was really craving something much deeper. So anyway, I came out here and, people don't just hand you a record deal. So I had to figure out how to make that a thing. And I got a day job. I found a job on Craigslist, and I was just trying to find a way to make a demo. And anyway, it took a couple of years, but I actually did get offered a record deal with Interscope. In fact, I remember when I was with Ron Fair and we were sitting in Sunset Sounds, which is this recording studio, and Lady Gaga was recording Paparazzi, and they were asking me, yeah, it was pretty weird. And they're like, what do you want from Starbucks? And they were introducing me to everyone. And I had like my, stilettos on and my True Religion jeans. And I was trying to be this person. And I'll never actually forget that night I was talking to Ron, and he was telling me that when he first came out to LA, he met with Bill Conti, who did the music for Rocky.
Right.
And
I love Bill Conti.
yeah. And he said to Bill, I want to be a famous songwriter. And Bill said, you know what, Ron, you're a really good songwriter, but you are an amazing producer. And you probably should double down on that. And it was a really interesting conversation. And he said to me, so instead of taking it as a rejection, I just doubled down. And now I'm one of the, greatest producers of this generation.
And talk about like really seeing the gift, right?
Yeah. And I was like, what is he trying to tell me? But 3 months later, I was driving and he called and he's like, can you pull over? And if you're in LA, you're always driving. So that's
right.
That's not random. Anyways, I pulled over and he told me that Jimmy Iovine wanted to drop me from the label because he liked me as a person, but they just weren't absolutely sure that I would sell records. And they thought my music was good, but maybe not good enough. And so I just remember sitting there on the side of the 10 freeway crying. And I was like, oh my God, I'm on the side of the 10 freeway. This was so dumb. I shouldn't have pulled over. And I can't believe it because it's sort of like meeting the Wizard of Oz. And he can't get you home. And so you don't even have the luxury of being like, well, if one day I met so-and-so, then it would happen. I just never met so. Now you're like, no, I got there and I was told to go somewhere else. Right. So I actually got a bunch of day jobs after that. And I thought that was what it was going to be. And everyone had told me, like, you're being unrealistic. You'll never make a living as an artist. You will eventually have to do what every other person does and quote unquote, grow up. And so I had a bunch of day jobs and I worked in a casting office. I worked in an interior design office. I was a floral designer. I worked in a real estate office. I did so many things until...
You were probably good at all of it, right?
I was actually pretty okay. Yeah, I guess. Well, because I'm so passionate. So it's like I give it all. And the last job I had was for this commercial real estate investor guy in Brentwood who owned a bunch of like $100 million shopping centers. And it was a joke. And he was actually paying me pretty well. And I was driving my little Mercedes convertible and eating all the sushi I wanted. And I started to cry. And lo and behold, I was in the car. Again, I remember I pulled over and I was crying. And I'm like, I did not come out to LA to work in commercial real estate for this guy who I met in line at the Cheesecake Factory a year ago. Literally. I was like, I came out here to do something else. And so I quit my job. And I quit a job at 25, making 150 grand is not something to sneeze at. It was a lot of money for 25
That's a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah. So I quit my job and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I said, I have to find a way to do music. And lo and behold, a week later, I was reading Billboard magazine and there was an article about licensing music to film and TV. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, I thought it's all or nothing. I thought it's Beyonce or bust, you know? And it turned out that artists were writing songs and licensing them to ads for Old Navy and Tropicana and TV shows like One Tree Hill and Grey's Anatomy. And I thought, what? That's a thing? I'm going to do that. And so I started to use my savvy from the real estate world and cold called ad agency after ad agency and got my way to the person who chooses music at NBC and Paramount and Lionsgate and started to like do everything I could to be a human and connect with them on like an actual like level where we would talk. And I started to ask them like, what do you need? What kinds of songs? What kinds of projects? And I started to get it like, oh, okay, you have to have a client and like serve your client. And I thought, wait, I can do this. And so I started to write music from a standpoint of telling these stories that were not just my own story, but universal stories. And the
Mhm.
first song I wrote that had that sort of universal message was called Count on Me. And the next song I wrote was called We're Good Together. And I pitched Count on Me to a bunch of TV shows because it was a little slower. And I pitched We're Good Together to a bunch of ads. And next thing I knew, We're Good Together was in a McDonald's ad, and Count on Me was in 2 different TV shows. One was called Body of Proof with Dana Delaney, and one was called Switch to Birth. And next thing I knew, I was doing like 40 placements a year, making like 300 grand, maybe something like that. And I was like, this is incredible. I
I
can't
love it.
believe I'm getting paid to go into the studio. And I was having fun and making friends with people who were real music fans who could really do something, as opposed to like just like taking a meeting and being like, we'll make you a star, kid. You know, it was like, no, I can like legitimately, like, I'll use this song in this show. Boom, it's done. Like, end of
Yeah.
story. It's in the bank. You're done. And I did that for 10 years, you guys. I did that for 10
You built
years.
some chops. You really
Yeah.
built some chops.
So
Yeah.
I wrote music for 10 years and licensed music for 10 years. And then I was featured in a bunch of magazines. And there was like a full page article on me in Billboard. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to now get a record deal, but it's going to work. And I didn't. But after these articles came out about me in Billboard and Variety and all that stuff, and it was like, look at this girl, she's doing it on her own. Oh my God. What wound up happening was other doors opened that I never thought would ever open, which was like other artists asking me to help them. And I thought, no, I don't do that, until enough artists asked me to help them do that, until I said, well, maybe I should actually say yes instead of saying no.
Mm.
And so I started a course called 6-Figure Songwriting, which was like just like the truth. Like that's what I was doing, was
Mhm.
making multi 6 figures, and artists weren't doing that. And so I created a course like helping them figure out how do you literally step by step like start to take your career seriously and have a client and care. And the course started to make close to $2 million a year. And then I started to sign artists from the course. It was just the next natural thing because we would have like 100, 150 great artists by the end
Yeah.
of the year. Out of the few hundred, there'd be like 100 people who really got it. And so I was like, I have to help you. And then we started to help them get placements, not just help them teach them, but like literally be the liaison. So then I started to hire people to run my agency. And then one of my students said, this is not about music. This is about any creative person who needs to understand that there is a way, there is a path. Like
Mhm.
you can make money as an artist, and there are different ways to do it. And so my friend, she's a girl who was in my class. She said, you should do a podcast. And I'm like, all right. And so I started the podcast 2.5 years ago, and we're at almost 9 million downloads in 2.5 years.
Nice.
Wow, that's
Girl.
amazing.
Right?
I mean,
Right? I know. It's
so much
crazy.
celebration. Well, here's the thing. And I just want to kind of rewind a bit because I know I've heard it. I know Nick has heard it. This thing where other #humans come up to artists and musicians and say, you will never make a living.
Yep.
And sometimes it comes from family who are trying to protect, right? Like get a real job. I mean, I spent years in orchestra. I've been on picket lines. I've been on strike where the mayor of the city where the orchestra I'm in resides would just be like, well, what's your real job? And we're like, are you kidding?
Oh, yeah.
Like people don't really understand. So in some ways it can really defeat, like, when we talk about the energy world, our thing is like, don't take that on. Yet it can be this sort of hypnotic suggestion. So how do you serve your people? What do you tell them when they are up against the doubters? When people have dreams, other people can't see themselves creating those dreams. So they go right into the doubt.
Yeah, of course. I mean, here's the thing. Everyone who's listening right now, and just like all those people who tell us that this won't be or this can't happen, every person, we have all gotten our hearts crushed. I mean, really crushed. Like, I don't have to know everyone who's listening personally to know without a shadow of a doubt that you've been through it. Like, you've been through it. And whether it happened when you were 6 or 9 or 11, like there was a moment where you lost someone, or you were rejected, or you lifted your arms out and no one came. And when that happens, it is so painful that we tell ourselves, you know what I'm going to do? And this is brilliant. I got it. I am not going to want anything. And if I don't want it, I won't hurt. And so at the time, that's actually a pretty brilliant survival strategy.
Yeah.
And so when those people look you in the eyes and they say, stop, don't do this to yourself, they want to protect the child in them.
Right.
And the child in you who wanted so badly to shine their magic or to connect deeply with someone else. And it didn't because your dad walked out, or you lost your mom, or you loved this boy in 7th grade and he didn't love you back, or you showed your art teacher something and you were so proud of it. And he said, that'll never work.
Oh, I remember that moment.
Yeah. And the pain is real. It's real. And so like your 8-year-old self would be pretty actually proud that you've even gotten through this way. Like it's pretty amazing how we survive. But we survive by turning off the wanting, the dreaming. In fact, I heard recently I had Todd Herman on my podcast.
Yeah.
And he was saying that Martin Luther King had prepared his iconic speech so many times and rehearsed it. And the only line that he didn't write was the only line that we know, which is, I have a dream. And it makes me cry like in this moment telling it. But basically when he got up to deliver that speech, he looked at the crowd and he looked at his paper with his perfectly written speech. And he took a deep breath and he said, I have a dream. And it is the most vulnerable thing, which is why it's so powerful. Right? Like opening up and saying, I do want it.
Right.
Takes so much courage, right? So I, first of all, get it. That's number one. And the thing that's really exciting that I've seen in my own life is that dreams totally come true. And here's the thing. Every single person is put here to add something. Like your DNA is unique, even if you're a twin, right? There's a reason why your fingerprint is different. It's because you've been assigned to do something. And so the magic is in that. And so what we really want, people think that they're here to be happy, but no one actually is happy when they're searching for happiness. And so what we really want is just to contribute. Like that's actually incredible that lights up in the brain stronger than sex or food, the fact that we just really want to contribute. And so the real dream is giving something that we have to give, that we have to express to someone else, whether you're making pie or you're painting a mural. And so when we can let go of how it's supposed to look and really, really hold on as tight as we can to being led to where we can eventually show up. It is, by the way, greater than anything we had planned. Whenever I meet someone and they're like, this is my 5-year plan, these are the next 15 steps, I'm thinking, dude, I'm like, you're thinking small.
Yeah.
Like, you're thinking too small because this is a kaleidoscope. This is going to keep shifting. You just have to get in the flow and then you'll be led to where you can actually serve. Like I tried so many doors, Kisma. Like that record deal, there were 4 other things that I tried that were so almost, but and then I do this podcast and it was like picking up this cup that's sitting in front of me. It was just like, boop. It was like the easiest thing. Like, there it is. It was like,
just flowed. Yeah.
Flow. It was like, I'm supposed to open this door. So, it's all here. It's all possible. And we can talk about, sort of my approach to how to really hone in on that. But yeah, there's going to be people who tell you that you can't, and mostly you. Right?
That's true.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, I want to back up to your story about Bill Conti, because I thought there was something really interesting in there where, so he's a good songwriter, but he's an awesome producer, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think there's people who they either want to go 2 directions, or they're kind of like, they're off on their direction just a little bit. Like, how do you tell the difference? Like, if their dream is to really just be a songwriter, is that like, do you just let them have that dream? Or when you tell them the truth, like Bill Conti did, to say like, look, this is how it is. You're good at that, but this is your thing. Like, double down on that.
Yeah.
It seems like that takes a really skillful eye and a caring hand to be able to deliver that information and to help people find that for themselves.
Yes.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So it seems tricky, but it's really simple. And people who are in business get this, but artists usually don't. So every single person who's created a successful business, whether it's Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, anybody, or even the people who created like Skippy peanut butter, like anyone who made anything successful knew they had to validate the idea, right? Like that is step one of the business. Get a focus group, test it, try it. Most artists have never thought of that. So what we do is we're like, I'm going to kick this door as hard as I can. I'm out here. I'm going to be an actor. It's been 12 years. I've gotten no validation, no feedback. I'm going for it. It's like, it's not working. It's not working. Right. Jenna Fisher, who was Pam on The Office, she was on my show and she said that her husband, he was, trying to be the actor. And so was she. She came out here from St. Louis. She's like, I'm going to be an actress. And you know what? No, it didn't take 4 weeks. It took 5 years for her to get on The Office. But within those 5 years, she got like co-star after co-star, guest star after guest star. It was so close, her and someone else for a couple different leading roles on pilots. And then finally, she got the part on The Office, where her husband came out here, not so much. A couple close calls, but mostly a lot of strife, right? And then one of his friends said, we're going to be working on this project and we need someone to write the movie. And you're a really good writer. You should write it. And he thankfully had the humility to say, you know what? Maybe I should write it. And so he wrote it instead of starring in it. And the movie won the Sundance Award. And he said, you know what? I just got major validation and I think I'm being called over here. And because he was willing to pivot and listen to where the world was ushering him, he created a big career as a writer-director. And he's very happy and very fulfilled. So it's about validating it. Most people, when they have an idea, we build businesses backwards. We sit by ourselves, we sit in our little laboratory and we come up with an idea for our blog, for our podcast. And it's like, I always tell musicians, like, they're like, how many songs should I have before I start pitching? I'm like, 1. Move your butt. Let's go. Because also you have a client. The difference between a hobby and a business is that someone is paying you. If it's a business, that means there's economics involved. It means someone else is valuing you to give you value for it. So they're going to give you paper value because they're going to say to you with the value of this paper, I needed or wanted the thing that you made, which means you have to make it for them. And a lot of artists are also in that fight. Oh, I don't want to make something that someone else wants. Great. Last time I checked, Randy Newman does care. He does care that Disney and Pixar like his songs. I don't think that makes him less of an artist, but you might. So maybe you're just really not willing to be in business as an artist, because John Williams, he has a staff of people that tell him what they like and he cares. And that's why, he has a great career. But that doesn't, Michelangelo was commissioned to paint the Sistine Chapel and he died with $50 million in his bank account. This is before inflation. Does that mean he's not an artist because he was commissioned? There's a lot to discuss here, but it's about, I had Seth Godin on my show and he said, business is radical empathy, radical. And if radical empathy is not at the front of your business, then you are really not in the business of serving someone else. And that's okay. That might mean that thing is a hobby.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's like we can function from ego. We can function from the need to be right, or we could function from the place of we really want to serve and expand and be creative and find like what is that pathway that works for us. But when people dig their heels in, it's like it's going to be this way. Man, it's rough going. It's like really, it can squeeze the whole dream dry.
Yep.
Just going to reflect on that for a second.
Nick's like, you're not turning white, are you?
No.
Yeah.
No. It's like, wow, like that's a really great answer. And it's so true, like obstinately holding on to something without actually listening.
Right.
And it really misses, like in my terms, because I'm really dealing a lot in energy. Like I do a lot of healing work and everything like that. So I always look at things from an energetic perspective. And that is basically, that's the constant output without ever like opening yourself up to actually receive anything in return, like whatever that is, good, bad, indifferent, like what do people have to say about this? And actually,
Yeah. I mean, my feeling is that everyone who's listening has a great idea. Like truly, they have something amazing, but they're lacking momentum, major. And part of it is from they're not taking enough action, because we can get into like why, and it's really their belief is just not there. So if you're not going to believe it, you're not going to do enough about it. So they're not taking enough action. But then we're also not understanding what it means to work smarter, not harder. And the momentum is going to come when you're really grounding yourself in making something for someone else, and then making that same thing for 3 more people, and then getting their feedback, and then sort of like folding in what they needed. It's easier to make dinner for someone and make it a success if you find out ahead of time if the person is gluten-free or a vegan, than like setting yourself up. You're dating this guy, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to win him over. And you make this amazing steak and you buy this beautiful bottle of wine, and he walks in and he's like, oh my God, this is so sweet, but I don't eat meat. Like,
and I don't drink.
Right. Or like you're designing clothes and you forget that you live in Minnesota. So nobody wanted like a wrap for the beach. Like people wanted something that was wool, and better for winter. So it's important to ground yourself and be like, who am I making this thing for? And then how do you do outreach in a way that also helps people feel seen? Like just the outreach, just that first step. When you're sending an email, it has to be about the other person. Just to first
totally
make the connection.
Service, right?
It's all about the empathy. And when it's that way, the momentum comes. It really comes, and you do get led to how you can serve in the way that you can.
Yeah, it really decongests things.
Yeah, it does. Well, that's interesting though. I think when people have that inertia, like in our teachings, the Indian, the Vedic teachings, they call it, that's tamasic nature. It's like, you're just set in, you're not moving anything. But I think a lot of times that happens, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this, is that I've heard this in so many contexts, like whether it's in business or whether it is even in their own personal and spiritual development. I'm afraid that I'm going to put all this time and effort in there and it's just going to all be a waste of time. And to me, from what you're sharing, which is a really cool insight and a really great way to look at it, is like when you take and really put the service first and foremost, it can't possibly be a waste of time. It will never be a waste of time. Have you run into that? And like, what are your thoughts on that?
Is it a waste of time reaching out to people? Is that the question?
Do you run into people who have that attitude, like, oh, I'm afraid to take some action on this, or I'm afraid to get in the game because I'm afraid it's going to be a waste of time?
100%.
Getting disappointed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is that is what it comes down to, right? People don't want to do something unless they know exactly how it's going to play out and what the next 50. This is why when I go to the Hollywood Bowl and I see someone who's performing, I don't think, God, this person is talented, because I do think that. But the first thing I think is, gosh, this person had so much courage. It's like, you're willing to take those steps. You don't know. No one can give you that. No one has that crystal ball, right? That's why you do tip your hat. That's why all of us have watched at least 14 movies where the reason we love the main character is because they kept getting back up and they had the courage to do it before the sea splits, right? They go for it, right? Isn't that story? Like, I think that's what it is in the Old Testament, where the reason that the sea split is because like this man like walked in up until finally like the sea was like over his head, and then the sea split, right? Yeah. So but here's the thing. I think that most people are waiting to not be scared, waiting to have all the information, waiting to be quote unquote ready, waiting to know for sure. What I think people need to get, which I didn't understand until the last few years of my life, really, really get it. Our brains were created to protect us. And all they do all day long is scan for things to worry about. They're looking for danger. It's looking for danger, looking for danger. And so the way that we work is really ridiculous. Like we just assume, we're going to wake up and be ready to like rip it open. Every person who's listening has had a moment where they felt really bold and they took that step. and you can remember, and it was amazing and it felt so good, and things happened. But we don't just naturally think and feel that way. So what I tell people is like, when you were, well, there was a time when we were all kids where at some point your mom was going up the escalator and you were like, I'll meet you. And you went up the escalator that was going down. You
Yeah,
walked
yeah,
up,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when you do that, if you stop, you don't stay in the same place, you go down, right? You
Right.
have to stay ahead of it. I think that it's like everybody right now without checking, don't check, but like I think all of us have some idea of like what percentage our iPhone battery is on. I know, I always know. It's actually insane. Like if I'm getting in an Uber on a Saturday night and my phone is at 41%, I physically start to feel like anxious. I'm like, oh no, my phone. We are sort of at 11% battery with our state of mind all the time, and we're not doing anything about it. So the people that I know, like you two, people who I know who are successful, I've had so many great human beings on my show, from Howard Schultz and Bobby Brown, who's an incredible makeup artist,
Yeah,
and
I love Bobby.
so many amazing people. And you know what? Every single person does. They have some kind of a practice where they feed themselves and charge their batteries so that they don't leave it to chance that they should feel so ready to rip it open. They fuel themselves. They charge just like you
Absolutely.
charge your phone, right? And then what happens is you don't have to work all day, you guys. There's probably, literally, I'm not joking, 90 minutes of work that you could do a day that would actually make a difference in your business. And the thing is, though, those are the things that most people never do.
Yeah.
Like emailing the person, making the phone call, setting
Right.
up the meeting. Like if you did that 45 minutes a day, you'd be crushing it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And then,
Totally.
yeah. And those are the things that only happen, though, when we're in a peak state. And so we got to
Exactly.
work on that.
I call that magnificent action. It's like being so clear and so aligned. The actions that you take are magnificent and yield magnificent results. This whole thing, I want to share one more thing around the music thing. And I know we want to talk about podcast and book, but I just had this Prosperity Co Live event this weekend, and we were talking about these very things, like when you don't take action and the energetic congestion that creates and everything slows down. And there was a story I told about Prince. I don't know if you know the story, but back in the day, he opened for the Rolling Stones in LA at the big, like, whatever Coliseum, and it didn't go well. In fact, he got booed off stage. It was a horrific experience. He grabbed the first flight back to Minneapolis, like just ran. Yet it was 6 weeks later that Purple Rain came out. And I was like, if Prince can get booed off stage at a Rolling Stones concert in front of whatever, how many thousands of people, could we not all get over ourselves, and take that next action? And, because disappointment, I always say, disappointment, failure, something gives us an opportunity to have another conversation with self, another conversation with God or universe, whatever it is, and dial it back in.
Yeah.
So tell us about your podcast, the next step. The podcast opened, it landed, it was easy, like drinking a glass of water. What do you love most about Don't Keep Your Day Job?
We were just talking about how certain things like fuel us and light us up. And when you have those sort of feelings, you get so many ideas, and it just launches you into action. And I just personally, that the greatest gift of it is that 3 to 4 times a week, I'm personally having those conversations with the authors of the books I've always loved, or the people I've always looked up to. Like I remember talking to Martha Beck, who's Oprah's life coach, and she's incredible. And I had her on. I'm like, I'm talking to her privately right now, or even getting to talk to you guys right now. Like the fact that the people in my life right now, these conversations and how it's like a supercharged Tesla station. That's how I feel. Like my whole body lights up. So it's been such a tremendous life-changing gift.
And people can find you in all the podcast places. Don't Keep Your Day Job podcast.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. We have such a fun time with it. And the audience, I think, feels really seen. I bring them in
Yeah, well,
pretty
and I
deeply to the
know
show.
like you have some creative fashionistas on. Like I saw that you had Tamara Mellon on. Do you get little like tidbits of gifts? Do they send you shoes and stuff after you interview them? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, Tamara Mellon, she created
Yeah.
Jimmy Choo.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's
She
got her
didn't
whole
send me
line right
shoes.
now. But did you know that she's got like a
Yeah.
whole thing happening? It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah, we talked about it actually because she believes that the future of retail is like, why would you charge your customer more? And because
Mhm.
you're charging them more, it's because you're paying rent and even Marcus. So her
Mhm.
whole thing is just going direct. So instead of charging $1,000 for shoes, she can sell shoes for $600 because they're on her website.
She's doing a great job of it too.
Well, she
Yeah.
already had such a major
Mhm.
success under her belt, but
Mhm.
yeah, we've had it's been so fun. Um, I'm actually interviewing Brian Grazer tomorrow, who is the epic producer, and he's partnered with Ron Howard, so they've done every movie together in the last 20
Yeah.
years. And he just wrote a book called Splendidly Curious. But we've had some amazing guests on, and yeah, it really was one of those things. Like the show started,
Mhm.
and I had just had my daughter, who was 10 days old, and I just felt compelled to start the show. And I did. And I thought we'd have like 12 listeners. And then Apple discovered it and they featured it. And then they chose us as the number one most inspiring show that year. And they put this list out. It was like our show was number one and Oprah was number two. I was like, how is that a thing?
You.
Bam. Wow,
Yeah.
look at you.
And then it just grew. Forbes wrote an article and they named us like the number one best female hosted podcast. And that article went pretty viral. And then Apple featured it again. And it just sort of grew and grew in really exciting ways. But
Mhm.
I'm just the girl who was sitting, in my closet the first episode. I get intimidated. I have to pretend like I'm not. I mean, interviewing Howard Schultz, I like broke down an hour
Aw.
before. I'm like, why would I have even done this? Like, why am I doing this?
Aw.
And then he was so great. He was
Yeah.
so great, so humble, so great. I didn't even know it, but we've all gone to Starbucks a million times, and Howard Schultz created Starbucks, but I didn't know that he grew up in public housing, that he grew up in a tenement and
Oh,
very,
fascinating.
very poor. And the fact that he is making $3.5 billion of
Mhm.
passive income. I mean, to know
Mhm.
his story, and he's been married to the same woman for 48 years. He's amazing.
Wow.
He's really,
Beautiful.
he's a
I
person
love
that
it.
he's what a person can be.
Yeah, exactly.
His story was so powerful.
Oh, I love it. Well, tell us about the book.
So I wrote a book called Don't Keep Your Day Job, and I wrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it until I had to put my pen down because they were like, you can't. I would have kept rewriting it because every few weeks, spending time with these kinds of people, I just kept
Mhm.
learning something else, something new. I remember at the end, we had Mark Manson on the podcast. And I was like, I have to get this in. One last thing. There were just so many things. But yeah, I wrote a book that helps people to identify what is possible and then
Mhm.
gives you some steps to start to think of taking. And one of the things that I do that I think is unique that's in the book is helping people understand that there are different archetypes, because like I felt when I came out here, it was either you become a famous singer-songwriter and you're selling out tours, or you're not. Like, I don't think a lot of
Yeah.
people know the different degrees or the different things that are possible. And we as people, we will reach for the highest branch that we can see. And so in the book, I started to talk about the 4 different things that you can do, because I've talked to over 200 successful entrepreneurs, and I've seen that there really are only 4 paths, but it's helpful to see yourself as one of these. So you can be the maker, right? Like you're making the shoes,
Mhm.
you're making the cupcakes, you're making the song, or you could be a teacher, right? You can teach people
Right.
how to write copy. You can teach people how to be productive. You can teach people how to play guitar. Or the third one is a curator. Like, so maker, teacher, curator. Curator is a person who's like, I myself don't do the poetry, or I don't feel as excited about doing it as I do like gathering people. And so I'm going to create a poetry slam, or I'm going to curate. I love stickers, and I'm going to create a membership where people get sent these boxes every month, right? Like people sometimes are
Yeah.
just like a big fan of something.
Yeah.
So you might want to be in that space. And then the last one is if you're an investigator. Like there are people who you would say, I'm not a person who wants to sell a thing or make a thing or teach a thing, but I really want to explore a thing. And so maybe you want to start a podcast or a blog, or you want to write a book, and you don't have to be an expert. Like you could be, or you could be a person who is definitely not the expert, but a person who's really curious. And you could say, you know what? I really want to be happier. So Gretchen Rubin was, admittedly, she was like, I wasn't happy. And I wrote a book on happiness because I wanted to look into it. And so we had her on my show, and I thought that was such a great piece of advice. You know, like you don't have to be the expert, but you could bring people along the ride with you.
Right.
So in the book, it sort of explores like which one of those feels good and what are the things that have to sort of happen in your own process to get you into the flow of being able to say, I really do love my life. And we've had so many listeners of our show actually do these things. Like I'll tell you, this is the best part of my show, second to like just the fact that it gives me so much energy. But the second piece that's the best is what it actually does for the audience. And we had a listener, his name is Greg Franklin. He lives in Missouri. This is like a perfect story. He lives in Missouri. He was listening to the podcast and he starts to think to himself, I'm not happy. He was working at a dog food factory in Missouri.
Oh, Greg.
I mean, right. It couldn't be more perfect. Like you could see this as a movie and John C. Reilly plays the part.
Right.
He works at a dog food factory for 8 years. His job is standing in front of a machine that makes plastic bags for dog food. Okay. This is a true story. This is a true story. I know it sounds like it's a horror story. It's true. So he's listening to my podcast and he thinks to himself, I never had any standout gift. I don't know what to do. I'm just not happy. And he's in his 40s and he's got 3 kids and he needs the healthcare. And he starts to listen to my show. And I'm always saying, be messy, give yourself permission to make something mediocre. Just make something, just try something. So he makes a cheesecake. And the next day, Facebook sees that he made a cheesecake. It sends him another cheesecake recipe. So he makes 2 cheesecakes. And one of them is a plenty for his family. So he puts the other one on Facebook. Does anyone want to buy the second one? No, no one wants to buy it. So he brings it to the local fire station. He's like, here's a cheesecake. And he gets a call the next day from the fire chief. And he says, did you bring that cheesecake last night? He says, yeah, that was me. He says, one of our sergeants is having a birthday next week. Can you make 12 of those? We're going to have a party here.
Oh, I love it.
So he's like, maybe. So he forgets that he needs a cheesecloth and it's kind of a mess and he has to make a second batch. Anyway, long story short, every week he starts to go into the town, in this little town in Missouri. And during his off hours, he starts to just walk into like the barber shop, walk into the bank with like a freezer bag. Like, does anyone want to buy a cheesecake? Like totally just being messy about it.
Yeah.
And he does that for months and months until finally he actually made a mistake in front of his job machine and some of the bags got ripped and he got fired. And his boss told him he's fired. And just at that moment, he gets a text from his friend that says, hey, Greg, it's National Cheesecake Day. I kid you not. He posted in our Don't Keep Your Day Job Facebook group, you guys, I got fired. And my friend texts me this and he shows a screenshot. It was National Cheesecake Day. He goes, I guess it's a sign. I'm going to do my cheesecake full time. He opened a brick and mortar cheesecake shop. He said to himself, if I can make the rent, I'll keep it for 3 months. In the first day, he made 3 times the rent. He's now the #1 Yelp reviewed cheesecake in the entire state of Missouri. He's now sold in several stores. And when I'm telling you, you and I don't have enough time right now, but and one day I'll tell you, or you'll hear somehow, there are 20 stories like that I could tell you every day if we sat down and had lunch from listeners of my show. And I wish I could tell you all of them because they're amazing. Like a girl in Nigeria, this girl in Brooklyn, this woman in Calgary who started her own mobile bookshop. People all over the world have changed their lives and found out that there's something in between being Beyonce or nothing, and you can make a living. And some of those stories are in the book.
I love it. Well, but it's your creative expression and the understanding of the creative field. You open it up for people.
Oh, thanks.
You really do. Like that's not, people have to be able to access that, and you give that safe space and get it going. It's so cool.
The permissiveness. It's like giving permission.
Yeah. And you kind of sprinkle this creative stardust all over everyone. I'm completely craving Greg's cheesecake. I'm going to go Google him.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, one of them that stuck out to me was the last one was kind of unexpected, the investigator.
Yeah.
And it's like,
that's
what a cool way in for
Mhm.
people to like, okay, I'm interested about this. I want to know more about this. Like taking that and kind of running with it and
Mhm.
creating something that will be valuable for other people.
Yeah.
I just think that's such an awesome
Yeah.
kind of unexpected way into this. I think it reminded me too of like one of my favorite podcasts too is Hardcore History.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's not a historian, you know. I remember
Yep.
in his podcast episodes are released. I'm not sure if they're still this way, but as I remember, they were released like really sporadically because he's busy
Mhm.
with his job and he's busy with these other things. Then he'll release these epic podcast episodes that are so good and so well thought out. They're
Yeah.
truly some of the best podcasts in that vein that I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I really want to do the work that I do, because
Yeah.
I feel like so many people would be doing more if they knew what to do. And the reason that they
Mhm.
don't know what to do is because they've told themselves there isn't anything to do. Like what I
Right.
want to do doesn't make a living. It's like, no,
Right.
no. What do you love? Do you love talking about this thing? Because that's a thing. Do you love
Yeah.
making the thing? Do you not love making it, but you want to teach it? Do you just want to gather?
Yeah.
If you're not going to be the acapella singer, do you just want to create acapella groups and then like find them different Christmas caroling gigs and
Yeah.
all around town and then just be a person who arranges the group? Like there's so many things a person can do. It doesn't have to be that you're either this thing or this expert or
Right.
nothing. There's
Yeah.
a way to be around the thing you love all the time.
Oh my gosh. I love it. Cathy Heller, we could be talking for hours, but I know there's life to get to. Please tell our listeners the best way they can find access to the book. And of course, everyone, we're going to have the links to the book on our show notes and her podcast. But I just want people who are driving, walking, and listening to know where they can find you immediately.
Yeah, thank you so much, you guys. Thank you. This was such a great conversation. So you can find the book, barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, wherever you buy books. Don't keep your day job. But if you go to the don'tkeepyourdayjob.com website, you're going to find that we are actually giving away bonuses when you buy the book. And so there's a lot of incentive, not just because I think it's a great book, but I think that there's fun things that you might like because we're doing like we're doing a masterclass on how to quit your day job, which is a 2-hour workshop live that I'm giving.
Nice.
Which you get. We're doing like a 90-minute Q&A with me that you get. There's a lot of fun stuff. We're even doing for people who buy a certain amount of books. I'm actually throwing a one-day in-person mastermind at my house. So there's a lot of fun perks.
Guys, go to there to get it. Like grab all the cool stuff. That's amazing.
Mhm.
I love it. Any last tip, share for our listeners?
You know what I just thought of is we were talking earlier about how there's a little kid inside of you who's really gotten hurt sometimes, and we forget to pull over to the side of our life and acknowledge that kid. So my last advice is I'd love you to get a picture of yourself when you were 6. Find it on Facebook. Maybe someone posted one at some point, or your mom has one, or you can find one somehow. Get a picture and put it near you. And right now, think about what picture that might be. Like we all know a few pictures from when we were kids. Like you can picture the Izod shirt and the bowl haircut, whatever you're, right? And think about this kid and look at her face and just notice like how obvious it is that she's so lovable and worth it and has so much magic. And I would just encourage you to apologize to her and tell her that you are so sorry for telling her that she is not enough, because she is so enough. And let her lead. Tell her, you know what? You get to lead now. And I'm going to trust that there's this thing called the flow. It's kind of this like magical thing. And when you step into it, there's an incredible synchronicity that comes, and we've all experienced it. And if you keep that picture like near your desk and you look at it every day, maybe it'll remind you to give her permission to be messy and don't force her to be perfect, and see if you can let her lead and let her be the one in charge for like at least 35 minutes a day. And then see what happens and how that changes your life.
I love that. That brings us to our illuminated thought for the day, which is messy is perfect as long as it's covered in love.
That's it. I love it. Messy. It's all about messy for me.
Messy is perfect as long as it's covered in love. Cathy Heller, you're amazing. Thank you so much for being here with us on Illumination Podcast for our listeners.
So fun.
Yeah, I can't wait I know we're going to be reading your book and our listeners and sending you and your family so much love and appreciation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kisma. Thank you so much, Nick. Thanks. Have a great day. I can't wait to have you guys on my show.
Oh, that'd be great.
You're
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste, guys.
Hey, thanks for jamming with us today. And if you enjoy Illumination Podcast, please go ahead and share it with someone you love. Give us a rating, review, download our podcast. And remember, you can find us at illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. Talk to you soon. Namaste.